Hey YouTube, Kamen Rider here, and welcome back to a Gotchard review as I review the series finale. It's been a while since I've done a standalone one. I stopped watching it, I stopped covering it regularly and doing the week-to-week watches and just kind of watched in the background at my own pace. I mainly watched an episode every week because it was really hard to watch more than one for me personally. But like I said in that last review, I'm gonna come back for the finale, and look, here I am, at long last! And then of course I will be doing a series review this week. I will primarily be just talking about the finale. I might mention some stuff on the periphery, but any other broader thoughts on things will be included in the overall series review. So let's talk about the finale. So overall, I think it was an okay finale. You know, generally the way I felt about this last stretch of episodes, and this is something I'll probably bring up multiple times in the series review especially, but it reminded me of Ninja in the sense that Ninja was a Sentai series I was kind of similar to this, where I just wasn't invested in it because there was various reasons, from the story to the cast to the pacing, that I just wasn't invested almost completely at all. And so as a result, you know, the last stretch of episodes were definitely more entertaining because you had finale arc and big picture stuff happening, but I just wasn't invested, and that's kind of the way I felt about this. So I felt it was an overall pretty average finale that wrapped things up pretty neatly and was decently enjoyable because there was a lot of stuff going on, but I just wasn't personally invested in it. But getting into the positives, like on a superficial level, there were some good fights in there, just some fun, entertaining fights to watch. In particular, I liked a lot about the final fights between Hotaro and Greyon. Like, I loved the parallel, dragon henshin they did with their two dragons. That was cool. I like that we brought back some sort of greatest hits of the forms, including his, final form in the episode being this evolution of Steam Hopper. But I always like when they do that in finales, just because there are a lot of forms that will often get forgotten as we get more and more into the super forms. So I just kind of find it to be a bit of a fun retrospective when you do some bringing back of old forms in the series. There was also some neat moments, like in the final battle when he's fighting alongside the Chemis, which I thought was cool. There was a couple cool shots in the episode, both when he was transformed and then later when he wasn't, with him with all the Chemis in the background, and I just liked those shots, and it did just make me I said it out loud for whatever reason, I didn't, it just made me think that I really wish I liked the Chemis more. I love the concept. I love so many of the designs, and I was just thinking, man, I wish this would have hit for me because I really like this idea here, and if this would have been a series I was invested in, this would be a cool moment. But it led to some really cool visuals, which I really enjoyed. So we get the last death of the original villain trio, and I am legitimately surprised that they let them stay dead. I was totally expecting some sort of 11th hour resurrection, either within the final battle somehow, or in the epilogue. I mean, there's a good chance they could be resurrected in some form in a future movie or V-cinema, but I was legitimately surprised, essentially since they all kind of gave them something of a redemption or humanization, that they didn't revive them, and I was pleasantly surprised by that. And there was a nice little final moment where the kind of, I guess, spirits of her sisters visited her, or a vision she was having or whatever, but it was a nice little moment for probably some of the only characters I kind of liked in the series. And again, I'm legitimately surprised they actually kept them dead. Speaking of surprise, when you get to the wrap-up, I'm also pleasantly surprised they didn't have a very cliche kumbaya ending for the Chemis and the humans. You know, with this series being, in my opinion, fairly by the numbers and generic in terms of what I expected to happen, I totally thought after the time jump we were going to see a world where the humans and Chemis are working together and stuff like that. And I was surprised that they don't have that yet. You do have a changed world, but the Chemis are kind of an urban legend, and they have their own weird digital world that Hotaro created, which is kind of interesting. I don't know, and in a way that's kind of at odds with the goal of the series. Humans and Chemis should live together. No, let's keep them separate. So that is a little bit at odds in a way, but at the same time I'm glad it was different than I thought. Maybe the idea is creating a world where the Chemis can live in peace, and then slowly you can have a situation where the humans might be able to go visit with them, kind of like the digital world in a way, what the ending of 02 was, where it's the digital world's known and it seems like they travel back and forth and everyone has partners. So maybe that's the idea, but I was just kind of pleasantly surprised by that because I thought it was going to be more cliche, and I thought it was kind of nice for that note. And I also did kind of like the framing device of him updating us, the audience, on all of the epilogue stuff by talking to Legend. I still think Legend's inclusion sticks out like a weird sore thumb in the series, but I like his character, so it was nice seeing him, and it made for a nice little framing device for that. And also, again, I wasn't overall invested in the series, and outside of the fact that we still have the dangling mystery of his dad, which is crazy, I think that it wrapped things up in a pretty neat bow, in the sense that it felt, at least in my opinion, for my level of minimal investment, in a satisfying manner, but obviously left things open for future V-cinemas and stuff like that. There wasn't any deaths or anything that needs to be weirdly undone. It left on kind of a nice closed book, but there's obviously stuff you can open up for later. As far as the negatives, most of it for me just comes down to my lack of investment. You know, in a lot of ways, I feel like I couldn't tell if this was a great finale just because I wasn't super invested in it. It felt just very generic for me, very like checklist for me. The only thing that I negatively have to say in terms of outside of my personal lack of investment and like all the emotional stakes, I just didn't feel it because I just didn't care about what was happening, is I don't like Greyon as the final villain. And I'll probably talk about this a bit more in the series review, but I just wasn't a fan of his character. I think he served his purpose fine when he had his initial arc, and I wouldn't have minded him coming back for like a mini arc later after we got the Abyssal Kings or whatever they were called, maybe a two-parter or something, but I don't like him as the final villain. I think his final motivation is goofy, and it feels like a weird final motivation to go up against Hotaro. Like, they went for this final lesson, I guess, of him like wanting to freeze things in place for eternity, and Hotaro says like you can't stay in one place for eternity, you gotta move forward, which is kind of a nice sentiment. But I felt like most of the series was overall about like the chemies and living together, and I felt like there should have been a villain that contrasted that, and instead we just have I love gold. So, I don't know, I just thought it was goofy. I did kind of like his suit. It's a little bit messy and fugly, but I also kind of dig it. But I just don't like him as the final villain. And I also felt it made it even more generic that you have him showing up, like summoning dread cannon fodder, as well as just like randomly bringing back the suits of the villains. Just, it felt so generic. Like, that's the thing. I didn't think this was a bad episode for me, like, but it was just very generic by the numbers, and I had a lack of investment, and I thought Greyon was a weak final villain for the series, when I think there was a couple other strong choices that could have been built up to in the series. And also, just circling back to Hotaro's dad for a second, that's so weird that they left that open, mainly because it's not unheard of for Rider to have dangling plot threads or loose ends that they clearly will follow up in a future movie or V-Cinema, but this was something all the way back from episode 1. If this was something that was introduced later or midway through and they were kind of planting the seeds for potential V-Cinemas, I could get it, but it's so weird that we specifically like addressed in the first couple episodes, like this is going to be something we're going to follow up on, and then in the last episode we still don't know it, and I don't know, maybe it's just meant to be like Ash's dad and it's never meant to be solved, except for in a weird one-off, like, alternate universe episode in the final season that you don't even meet his dad anyway? That's Pokemon. Anyway, I just thought that was weird, and it just kind of reminded me of how Gotchard had too many spinning plates. So, overall, guys, you know, this episode was alright. I felt personally it was just very generic, and I wasn't invested in it, and I didn't like Greyon as a villain, but I think maybe it wrapped things up neatly for people that liked the series. Like I said, I'll be doing the series review within the week, but for right now, let me know what you thought of the finale in the comments as always. Until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell to get notifications for my videos. Dawson Rider, signing out.